Hi everyone. So welcome today. It looks like there's a whole bunch of you already here. Let's see, I see Uni and Brian, Carlos, Celtic Tiger, Rob, Florin, IDK, Jihad, Joanna. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today. As usual, I would love to hear where you all are tuning in from. And I see Randall, and I'm not sure how you would say that. I guess Chibebe, that name. Another one I'm not sure how to pronounce. Clicko or Clickote. Hermit on the Lake, that's a good name. M. Cantler. So where are you all tuning in from? Let's see. Oh, we've got Portland in the UK, Rochester, New York. Ah, Yusuf is in Cairo. Nice. It's been too long since I've been back. Hi, Claudio. And let's see, we've got Daniel something, who's tuning in from Israel. My Hebrew is a bit rusty, but I got that your first name's Daniel. And Celtic Tiger from Ireland. Let's see, Clickote from Brooklyn, the Netherlands. Oh, we got some new places this time. Finland, Uni is in Finland. Hi, Richard. Evan Phillips is in Istanbul. Oh, cool. I think that's a new one. I don't think anybody has tuned in from Istanbul before. Arnhem in the Netherlands. So we got a couple different people from the Netherlands. Let's see. Jihad's in Pennsylvania. Rob's in Sullivan. Sorry, I'm mixing up your name with your location. Rob's in Houston is what I meant. Chibebe is in Argentina. Oh, and you said you went to Egypt a couple years ago. That's great. And Floren's in Romania. Michael, is that how? But is in the UK right now. And Carlos is in Mexico. Oh, we've actually got a lot of you are familiar, but there's actually a bunch of new people in new places, it seems like, too. Oh, Randall's from Barbados but lives in New Jersey. Cool. All the other weekdays this week, I've been doing that lately, where I do a live one day a week, and then the other days are that. Hermit on the Lake, joking about having a mummy unwrapping by having basically hot dogs, called pigs in a blanket, hot dogs in a pastry. Another person from Mexico as well, and Diego, and Crazy Fox from Russia. I think there's a few new people and new places this time. There's always a lot of places, but even more this time since there's over 20 of you in here right now. All right, so what I wanted to start with for you guys today is to talk a little bit about basically what are the best strategies for approaching learning hieroglyphs. And then we can get into some Q&A. So some of this might be things that you wouldn't have necessarily suspected before. Let's see, Chibebe is having trouble with the connection. Let me know if anybody else is having trouble with that too. So far YouTube on my end is saying that it's excellent connection. And Joanna's in Santiago, Chile. So, let me know if you're having trouble. Not sure if I can fix it or not, but I can try to do a little troubleshooting if there's a problem. So, it's choppy. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure why. Let me see. Maybe I will close down a few things that I've got going on the computer in case that's the issue. Because maybe I got too many things running. I do tend to be somewhat of a hoarder when it comes to applications. So that very well could be the problem. All right. Although a lot of people say it's good. So I don't know. I guess it's a mixed bag, it seems like. All right, I closed down a bunch of things in case that helps. But I do have a few things open that I need to leave open because that's things that I was going to share with you guys. All right. So hopefully that helps it. Oh, good. Good to hear that I pronounced your name correctly, Michal. I try. I don't always know what to do. So that goes, oh, and Joanna's having trouble too with the connection. Well, I've shut down a bunch of stuff, so I'm hoping that that will improve it. So, oh, the video is freezing for some people, I guess. Some people are saying the audio is good, but the video is freezing. So, not sure what's up. So apologies for that. I hope it will smooth out. And, oh, Michal, you took Middle Egyptian before. That's cool. You don't run across a lot of people who've actually taken a course in it before. So, so hi, Carrie Ann. All right. All right. Some people are saying it's good. Some people are having trouble. So I'm just going to move through it and hope it works out okay. Apologies. I will try to do a little troubleshooting before the next time to get it right. So hopefully closing, some people are saying it's better. So hopefully closing things helped. All right. So, oops, I've got the wrong slide on. Didn't want that one yet. So what I'm going to talk about is, Clicko says that it's working well now and that he or she had to leave and then come back in and that fixed it. So if you're still having trouble, I guess try that. So what I was going to get into today is basically the best way to actually have sort of long-term learning from your studies rather than short-term. Because I know, and Carlos also lowered the video quality and that helped for him. I know, I imagine a lot of you can probably relate to what I did when I was younger. And I still definitely sort of knee-jerk to doing now as well. But if I think about it and realize it's not the best strategy, I can take it a little bit different way. But certainly when I was younger in college, for example, and even early in grad school, my study skills were not the best. Now, part of that is because when I was that age, I was blessed with a pretty good memory. Now, I'm a bit older than that now, and so I don't really have that anymore. And I have to say, I'm envious of people who didn't have it to start with because they probably developed better study habits than I did. But when I was in college, for example, one of the things, what I would do to study basically is I would try to take as thorough notes as I could when I was in class. And then if it was a lecture class, at least, and then I would basically just read through my notes before quizzes and exams. And that worked in as far as I could do well on an exam. Now, did it work in terms of me actually remembering that later? Not really. I mean, a bit better certainly at that age than it would be now at my current age. Things definitely leave me faster than they used to. But even, when I was 19, I still probably would not have remembered the stuff I studied for an exam more than maybe a few months. And I might remember bits and pieces longer. There are still some bits and pieces from college that I studied for exams from that just for whatever reason, a couple things have stuck and I still remember them now. But most things end up just going away. So I imagine probably a lot of you were like me in terms of how you do this. Or, you read the readings again, those kinds of things. And there's actually been a lot of research. I'll cut myself a little bit of slack. I don't know that there was much of this research actually out when I was that age, but I probably wouldn't have known about it even if it was. But there has been a lot of research now on what is better to do that actually causes long-term learning rather than just the short-term that's good for a test the next day, right? Joanna says yes, I guess she can relate to this. So one of the big things is that they found in research is what I've put in this slide here, which is that easy gives the illusion of fluency. So if you read your notes, you read the readings, whatever, and as you're reading, you're thinking, oh, this is familiar. I remember this from class, right? Or something like that. And you're thinking, I've got this. I remember this well. You feel like you know it really well and fluency, and that may work in the short term, but they've found through research that if something comes that easily for you, it feels easy, that you actually won't remember it for very long. So the key actually is to struggle. Now, this feels very counterintuitive because we feel like if we're struggling with something, it's not easy, that we're not doing a good job and that we're not learning it well, right? But they've actually found through research that it is the opposite, that the more you struggle with something, the better you will understand it and you will remember it for a longer time than if it came easy for you. So, and they've tried this out in various forms by having students had them do it in different frequencies of time over it and so forth. And this is how they've discovered this. So when you struggle, and especially repeatedly, so not just once, like the night before a test, for example, which I know we've all done at times, right? But if you do it at different times, different intervals over time, then that will be even better in terms of cementing your memory. So the struggle, Crazy Fox says, no pain, no gain. It kind of is true, at least with learning. I think when it comes to your physical body, probably not. You don't really want to be in pain if you're trying to, work out or something, because you might injure yourself. But when it comes to, memory and things, it really does actually work that way. So the struggle could come in many ways. Struggle could come in the form of a quiz, for example, or an exam. And so actually one of the things I do when I teach at a university is that instead of having a midterm and a final, I have multiple quizzes, at least 3 over the semester, occasionally more. But I have at least 3 spread out over the semester, and they're fairly short, but they do have in-depth questions on them. And I find this repetition and this spacing of it, even though they're not necessarily answering exactly the same questions each time, really does help students. They do a lot better. They understand the material better, and they understand it longer throughout the semester than if I were to just do a final and they cram for that and then in a final. So I usually do at least 3 quizzes and a final over a semester. So that's one way to struggle, but you can also produce your own struggle. So even if you don't have an outside accountability, like taking a university course, for example, where you're going to be tested, you can do this yourself. You could do it in a study group, obviously. I'm sure people have, if not tried, at least heard of people who get together to study and they quiz each other. That's a really good way. And it doesn't have to be for like taking an official course. This could be for anything you're learning. So if you're learning hieroglyphs on your own, it's great if you have a study buddy and you guys can quiz each other and so forth. But even if you're studying on your own, you can do this. Or if you study with a group part of the time and then you also do some work on your own, you can do this on your own by doing even just really simple, sounds really old school, but things like flashcards. Flashcards sound, like I said, really old school. And you can do this actually with paper or index cards, or you can do it with some of the many flashcard apps that they have now. So you can go a little bit more modern and use flashcard apps, although I have to be honest, I think it's harder to make flashcards digitally for hieroglyphs than it is actually to just write them. Even if you print out some hieroglyphs to glue on one side and you write the other side, I still think it's actually probably a little faster. But anyway, yeah, ID cases, they like Quizlet, and I have had some other students who use Quizlet. I think there are some decks out there that people have made. You just want to check it against whatever other study materials you have, because sometimes people make decks and they don't really know what they're doing. So I'd just be a little bit cautious with that. Or they might be right, but they'd be hieroglyphs that aren't very useful, for example, like really obscure ones that you're not likely to see very often, and might not be the things that you should be spending your time on. So a little cautionary note on that. But when you use the flashcards, the key is to allow that struggle, right? So when you look at a flashcard, the inclination, so let me just show you. I made a quick little, just paper. It's not really an index card, so it's kind of see-through, flashcard version here, right? So let's say I have my flashcard here with the bird that's usually called a vulture, but it's a bird of prey of some type. And so I'm going through my flashcards. The inclination is you look at this. If you don't know it real well, perhaps you go, yeah, I recognize this bird. I remember it's something kind of like an A. And then you flip it over. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's called Aleph. It has that transliteration that looks kind of like a 3. That's going too fast. You're not allowing yourself to struggle with that. So the better way to do this is if you look at this and you go, okay, or even if you say, I know this, and then you flip it, go slower. That's a big thing. It's just slow down. Instead, look at this and say, okay, I recognize this bird. I think it has a sound kind of like an A. What else can I remember about it? What's it called? How is it transliterated? And think about it for a minute. Like, really give yourself the time to think about it. Don't just rush to be like, I can't remember, and flip it over. Pause. This is key with this. So in, somebody was asking about whether to use the MDC, the Manuel de Codage, I guess. My French is horrible, so forgive the pronunciation, or transliteration. Yeah, you can do either. I mean, if you know both, it's easier, obviously, to type MDC over transliteration on most apps because you don't have to deal with a special font. But if you don't know the transliteration already, better to stick with transliteration to learn it because that's what you're going to find in all kinds of books and publications and so forth. So that's what I've put on the opposite side. I put the transliteration and the name of the sign because we call it Aleph. So that's not necessarily obvious by looking at that. So struggle with it first. If you can't remember, that's okay too. But just give yourself time to struggle with it. And they've actually found that even if you don't have the answer, if you take the time to struggle and try to recall it, that you will remember it better from having done that than if you just looked at it and said, I don't know this one, flipped it over, and then looked at the answer. So they've actually studied this. It works. Now, you could apply this same technique to anything else that you're studying, of course, too. I'll stick with hieroglyphs today as examples. But so like if you're learning from a book or if you're in a class and there's some kind of exercises that you're given to do, such as transliterating and translating a text, you can do the same thing with that. It might manifest a slightly differently, of course, because you're not doing a flashcard that you flip over. But the idea is basically the same. Give yourself the time to struggle with it. So when you're working through that text, if you don't know part of it, don't rush to look it up. Do the parts that you can figure out. Give yourself the time to struggle with it. Do all the parts that you can figure out. Sometimes once you've done the other parts in a sentence, for example, it will occur to you what the part was that you couldn't figure out at first. So that can help. And that'll definitely cement it in your memory better than if you had looked up that word. Sometimes you won't, but still that struggle, doing that struggle first before you look things up will help you remember it better in the future. So another thing I would suggest, and this goes with the repetition. So with flashcards, for example, you can work on your flashcards every day. The ones that are easier for you, set aside and still look at them sometimes, but not as frequently. The ones that are harder, do that more frequently. Daily is best. But if you can't do daily, every other day, whatever, they're flashcards, so you can do them really quick. Fit them in when, these days we're not going out a lot right now, right? But if you're waiting for a doctor's appointment, you could pull your flashcards out of your bag or your phone if you're using an app. Or if you're standing in line at the grocery store, which we still do now, and even more than before, this would be a good time to study your flashcards. So you can do a similar kind of thing with text. A little harder to do if you're standing in line, if you're translating a larger piece of text, right? But you can do the same thing in terms of repetition. So work on the text, see what you can figure out, then take a break. Preferably a long enough break that you actually sleep in between. So this could be from one day to another, or if you're the kind of person who naps, could be that you work on it some in the morning, you take a nap at some point during the day and you work on it later. And that actually really helps you process. So sleeping especially, but even if you don't sleep, simply giving yourself time, your mind is actually still working on the stuff you couldn't figure out in the background, even if you don't realize it. And oftentimes if you do that, when you come back to the text, rework it, you'll realize that parts of the text maybe you had wrong and you correct them now that you've had time to really process. And other parts that you didn't know, you might remember. Now, there's probably still going to be parts you need to look up, but the point is you do the struggle first and repeatedly, then you look up. And you will remember things better when you do it in that kind of sequence. And I know we are not naturally inclined to doing that, most of us. There are some people who, if they know that that's the best way to do it, they'll just do it, no problem. But I think most of us are inclined to push things off until the last minute a lot of times and things like that. So it is hard to do. I wouldn't say that it's easy in terms of doing that. But one way to get yourself to do it is also to set up a regular habit of like, this is a particular day and time when I do my flashcards or whatever it is that you're working on. All right, I'm just looking at mine. I took some notes to make sure I remembered what I wanted to tell you guys. So let me see, what else did I want to include here? I already talked about taking a break and so forth. So the final part that I would say about this, and I mentioned the repetition, so that's why I have rinse and repeat here. Oh, and I kind of alluded to this, but I guess I should say a little bit more about it, which is that frequency trumps total time of studying. So this is why I suggest, for example, studying for smaller amounts of time every day if you can manage it, even if it's only 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. Do while you have your cup of coffee in the morning, go through your flashcards, or during lunch, you know, if you work regular 9 to 5 hours, you can do it when you have some kind of break or lunch or something like that. I do suggest trying to figure out what time of day you work best and stick with that. So for most of us, that's probably morning. But for true night owls, that's probably going to be sometime in the night and the late evening, perhaps. Figure out what works best for you in terms of both being motivated, more likely to do it rather than push it off, as well as just, you know, feeling a bit sharper when you're doing it. It's best to do. So sometimes that might be right before you have breakfast or when you're having your coffee or tea or whatever it is that you drink in the morning. So frequency, they've done studies on this too. They had students, for example, I don't remember the exact time, but they had, I think it was students in a Spanish class. They had them, one group studied for 2 hours, one day, or maybe it was 2 days over a week or something like that. And they had another group that broke up that amount of study over more days. Still the same amount of time, but they broke it out over more days and only studied like 20 to 30 minutes at a time. And the students who broke it out into smaller chunks and studied more frequently performed better on the test that they gave those students who had done the two methods. So just goes to show that it does work. So the final thing I was going to say, though, is that you make it active whenever you can. So our inclination is to do like what I was talking about in the beginning, where I was saying, you know, my tendency was just to read my notes, right? That's a very passive activity to read. It's a pleasurable activity as far as I'm concerned, but it is a passive activity. It doesn't tend to actually get you to remember very much. And so it's better if you can make it active in some way. So with flashcards, for example, if you're alone, one way to make it active is simply to say the things aloud. So you could take this same flashcard I had before and look at this and say, okay, this bird, do what I was doing before, but actually say it aloud. Don't just think it. Say, okay, this bird, I recognize it. This is the one we call olive. And in modern times, we pronounce it like an ah sound. Now, if you want to take it a little further, you could say, you know, the actual ancient pronunciation was probably more like a glottal stop. But I don't think that's necessarily necessary when you're first learning hieroglyphs. So that would be one way to do it. Say it aloud. Even if you don't know, talk it out. Say, I remember this is something kind of like an A. I can't remember what it's called. How is it transliterated? And talk about it aloud. And then maybe it will come to you when you do that. Oftentimes, if you make it active by talking to somebody about it or pretending you're talking to somebody about it, it will come to you. And so you might say, oh yeah, that's right. This is the one that the transliteration looks like a 3. and then you'll remember that part. And even if you don't, again, having done that activity and struggled will help you remember it more later. So if you're not somewhere where you can speak aloud, but maybe you can take some notes or you can scribble something down, whether it's on your phone, say with your finger, or on a piece of paper, another way to do this too would be actually to use the hieroglyph to write something. So if you're far enough along that you know some words in Egyptian, think of a word that you can write. Or maybe you're learning a word on your flashcards rather than an individual sign. Whatever it is you're learning on them. Think about using a sign in a word or a word in a sentence and see if you can write that out in Egyptian. Now, if you don't know something like that or you can't think of something, use it to write somebody's name transcribed into hieroglyphs. That will give you that, again, you're using it actively. You're applying the knowledge to something. So this will also help greatly with retention. So, okay, there's a bunch of comments that said, the Hermit on the Lake mentioned JSesh. Yes, I recommend JSesh all the time for people who want to type hieroglyphs. It is still good to practice drawing them, even if you are horrible at drawing them, as I am. But I use JSesh whenever I'm writing things up for my students and stuff like that, because my handwriting is in hieroglyphs. Well, my handwriting in general is pretty bad, but in hieroglyphs, it's even worse. But I still do practice writing text out in hieroglyphs sometimes when I'm translating a text, for example. That also helps with memory. Again, it's a more active thing than simply reading the text if you draw it out. So I also recommend drawing it out, even though there are convenient things like JSesh. Let's see. Oh, Jennifer was asking about writing out Jennifer. Yeah, Jennifer, as P points out, with Jennifer, one of the nice things with that is you can use the Nefer sign for the Nefer part of your name. And I would use the second D, which has a kind of D sound, and then the Nefer sign, and you've got enough right there. So, let's see. Yeah, I think P is just saying, not sure if he or she is correct, but yeah, I would go, I think the Nefer sign is a good choice with that. So feel free for you guys to go ahead and hit me up with some questions. I just kind of threw a bunch of information out there at you in terms of study skills, but these are things that I've seen work with people. And yeah, Carrie Ann says she practices drawing them and then quizzing herself with the transcription. That's an excellent way to do it. Any way that you can give yourself that struggle as well as something active to do with it, that is going to help you tremendously. So that's definitely a really good strategy, Carrie Ann, that you're already doing some of that with the struggle and the on that. Yusuf is asking, what are some of the features that can help you distinguish the different birds? That's a good question. So, and part of the problem with distinguishing signs in general, and birds are maybe a little bit more extreme example of this, is that every ancient Egyptian also wrote them a little bit differently. So just like with modern handwriting, oftentimes there's small differences. And even when carving in stone, as well as, of course, if they were writing this, like the more cursive form, like hieratic. So Crazy Fox is asking about my class that I have teased. Yeah, I'm putting it together right now, and weeks. So you'll be hearing more about that. But I want to make sure I have the stuff ready for you guys first before we get started on that. And I will be incorporating some of the things I've been talking in these lives, like study skills and various aspects of hieroglyphs and how to tell them apart and so forth. So, Yusuf, for telling apart the signs, sometimes they have really distinctive things that you can tell. So, for example, some of the really common birds, like Aleph and the Wow or W, and the M, which is an owl, have features that you can tell them apart by. So one thing is, if it's a detailed enough representation, you can look at their toes. So, okay, now I have to admit, in JSesh, it doesn't really, I did this hieroglyph in JSesh, and it doesn't really show it super detailed. But you notice how the toes stick out both in front and behind the legs of this bird. So you find that in most of the birds. But then some of the birds, the toes only stick out in front. So that would be one way that you can tell some of the birds apart, is if you look at the feet. So when you're studying them, you can look at some of these different attributes. Now, when they're typeset like this, of course, it's a lot easier to tell them apart than when you're looking at an actual ancient Egyptian text. And when I teach, I do use a mix. I do give some, especially early assignments, typeset like this. But then I try to move into real text as soon as possible, because it's easier to read these, but the longer you delay doing real text, then the harder, it's not necessarily harder, I suppose, when you get to it later, but the longer it takes you to be able to recognize real ones. So when you look at different attributes like that, sometimes you can tell. So with this one, again, it has the little pointy beak and it points down a little bit. So sometimes that'll be shown in an actual Egyptian text. They'll do it detailed enough that you can tell that about the beak. These are the kinds of features you got to look for. It's small oftentimes. Sometimes it's the tail feathers is how you can tell them apart. So for example, the werebird, WR, and the bird that's a determinative for small or bad things look almost identical. The only difference is their tail. And one has, let me say, I write on my makeshift flashcard here. So one has a tail that's basically one has a concave tail and one has a convex tail, is the difference. So, whoops, sorry, bumped my mic. That was probably loud. So that's the only difference in the bird. The whole rest of the bird looks the same, but one has this more convex, rounded tail. The other one has a concave tail where the end kind of curves inward instead. So it can be annoying to some extent, especially when you're first trying to learn. But these little features with the birds are what will help you tell them apart. Let's see. So, yep, let's see. People are talking about the direction. Florence asking about the oldest hieroglyphs discovered. So, there's some debate about that. The oldest ones that have been pretty well argued to really represent the Egyptian language, that you can pick out what seem like some words that we see later, are some ivory tags from the early tombs at al Ghab, which is part of the site of Abydos or Abydos, depending on your pronunciation. And I'm trying to remember, I haven't looked at them in a while, so I can't really remember specific examples of what's on them, but they're from the pre-dynastic period, about... now again, I haven't taught this part in a while, so now I'm a little rusty on it, but I want to say it's probably about 3500 BC or so, give or take some. And there are some rock inscriptions in the desert that some scholars have found and have suggested might be earlier representations of certain things. Some people dispute that that's really what they are, or the dating on them, so it's a little bit hairy, but the more well-accepted ones, I would say, that, every scholar, well, not every scholar. There are some people who dispute that actually that the hieroglyphs on the on the ivory tags are really, truly like early words in Egyptian. But I would say it has a majority behind it. Yusuf was just saying, great, thank you. Glad that helps you, Yusuf. Let's see. Yeah, Carlos is pointing out if you want to write your name, you can download my free guide. That's thank you for pointing that out, Carlos. There's a link in the description for this in this video, and I think I have it in pretty much the description for all my videos. And if you want to just type it in, it's voicesofancientegypt.com/guide. So let's see. Celtic Tiger saying you find it good practice to look at an actual text. I absolutely agree. I think flashcards are useful as a side thing. I wouldn't do it exclusively. It can help initially with learning some of the hieroglyphs because early on that can be something that's pretty difficult. And I think as you get later, it might make more sense really to just pick up hieroglyphs onesie twosie as you're reading. But initially, it can be helpful to get you kind of off the ground. So Herman on the Lake, glad to hear you that you enjoyed the study tips, that they were helpful for you. P asking about the pyramid on the dollar bill. You know, I can't remember. I've read about that before in the past. I can't remember what the deal is with that other than you hear a lot that the founding fathers of the United States, a lot of them were members of the Freemasons, and Freemasonry uses a lot of Egyptian imagery. So I think that's where the image comes from, but I'm not an expert on the last few centuries of Egyptomania, although it is something I'm interested in, and I've thought about putting together a course on before, actually. Crazy Fox talking about Narmer. Narmer is actually later, though, than the ivory tags at Abydos, but you do have some what seem to be words or short phrases on the Narmer palette also. Let's see. Oh, Evan's asking about that there's a sign that is all sometimes rendered as Mer MR and sometimes as Ab Aleph B. That is actually, that sign can be both. So you have to figure it out from the context. A lot of times that's when what we call phonetic complements, where they repeat a sound by adding another hieroglyph or two after a hieroglyph that has 2 or 3 sounds in it, can be handy. So, for example, with that particular sign, one of the ways you can tell if it's Mer or Ab is there an R following it, or is there a B following it? Because they will very often have those phonetic complements, and that'll tell you which one it is. So, for example, the name of the site that we call Abydos or Abydos, in Egyptian, that's Abju, and it's spelled with that sign. But they also use the B phonetic complement, the lower leg, next to it. So it becomes more obvious that that's what it is. But yeah, it can be a little frustrating sometimes when you're trying to look up a word and you're not sure which way the sign's being used, and you're looking at a dictionary and you have to look in 2 different places sometimes. It happens. Oh, one thing I did want to mention to you guys also, because I had mentioned it before, but things were not opened up yet for it, is the lecture series that the American Research Center in Egypt is putting on. It's for members, but I didn't have the lineup to give you guys last time. I have it here. So, okay, it doesn't format terribly well in the chat box. Sorry about that. But when I put it in, it gets rid of, you can't do a return in the chat box. But I'm actually giving the talk not this Saturday, but the next one. Kara Cooney is this Saturday. So if you don't know Kara Cooney, you haven't been watching a lot of documentaries and stuff. She's written some popular books and had her own documentary series for a while. Somebody else you probably would have heard of is Salima Ikram. She's giving the final talk in the series on June 27th. They are planning to probably do some more talks further on in the year too, but it probably won't be every week all year long. But they're started doing this because usually we have regional chapters as part of, we call it RC for short, the American Research Center in Egypt. And if you want to sign up, you can go to rc.org/membership, and I will pop that in here. So, what was I going to say? I forgot. Oh yeah, they're doing this because usually there are chapters of RC in different parts of the country, and they usually put on lectures where they bring in a speaker, another Egyptologist from somewhere else to give a talk, and the members come to attend the talk. But right now, because we can't gather in large numbers because of COVID-19, they're switching to online for the members so that the chapters themselves, the national organization is helping to organize this and co-sponsoring with the chapters so that they can still have events for members. So if you're interested, if you're already a member, you should have emails telling you how to register for the talks. If you're not a member, you can sign up at the link I just gave. And if you do become a member, I would suggest it was great if you could pick a chapter near you so that when there are in-person events, you can go to them. If you don't have a chapter near you, I would love to have you as part of my New Orleans group. I run the New Orleans group. So you're more than welcome to do that. I do actually plan, even in the future, once we can meet in person, to still do some online talks, because a lot of my members tend to be a little scattered. Like some of them are in Texas or Arkansas and stuff like that, and they're not going to come to New Orleans for a talk. So it's one of the things I already had on my radar even before all of this happened. So anyway, that was that. Oh, your birthday's on May 30th. Yeah, that's Steve Harvey speaking on May 30th. I'm on the 23rd. I know it's formatted funny because I can't do returns in the chat. So Carlos is asking if you're affiliated with a chapter, can you go to the other ones? Yeah, so these ones are all put on for all members. So regardless of what chapter you're associated with, you can attend all of these ones. Normally with chapter events, which are generally in person, you would need to be a member of that chapter. Or some chapters allow members to go for free and other people to go by paying. Or they have different levels. Some of them all pay, but members pay less. And, it depends on the chapter. They do it differently. But hi, Armand from France. Welcome. So yeah, but for these ones that they're doing online through national, and you could be a member affiliated with any chapter and living anywhere in the world. Hermit on the Lake says that FDR actually put the agreement on the bill in 1935. All right, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not an expert on that, so interesting. All right. So I think I will leave you guys with that, since it looks like I haven't seen any new questions pop up in the last moment. So I do hope to see you at some of these RC talks. Kara Cooney is going to be talking about royal coffin reuse this Saturday. Mine is going to be about Tulane University's Egyptian collection here in New Orleans. And it has kind of a wacky modern history, which I'll be talking about in that, as well as some of our research findings. It's kind of, like I said, it's a bit of a wild story. And I'm not sure yet what the other speakers are going to be talking about. They haven't announced the descriptions for those ones yet, but I am looking forward to. I'm gonna be going to all of them. One of them has passed, which is Nicholas Picardo's this last Saturday. It was great. I went to it. So I hope to see you all there, and I will definitely have another live next week as well. And okay, Carlos just asked before I sign off how many times I've been to Egypt, or Kemet if you prefer. It's kind of hard to count because I spent a fair amount of time there. I've been on excavations twice. I also had a fellowship, and I lived in Cairo for most of a year. And I kind of came and went sometimes during those times and came back and forth. So it's a little bit, I don't know, you could count that as 3 times, I guess, or depending, because I left the country and came back a few times, you could count it as more, but yeah. So, all right. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for coming today. I will catch you again next week. And in the meantime, you can catch me certainly on social media. If you have other questions or want to check out what I'm doing there, you can find Voices of Ancient Egypt on Facebook or on Instagram. And of course, here on YouTube with the videos. All right. Have a good one, everyone.